Well, good morning, and thank you for the invitation. First, wanted to start out with how many students do we have in the audience? So a fair amount. All right, great. So actually, I'll start out with a question for the students in the audience. So of all the students who just raised their hands, how many consider yourself an environmentalist and want to have a career impacting a positive outcome for the environment? And I'm going to shame those of you who didn't raise your hand this time, but raised your hand before. All right, really? All right. So I think some of you got shy in between the two. So for y'all, what is it, at least a couple of you, what do you vision your career as? You're thinking about your future work life, and you're committed to wanting to have your career be a positive outcome for the environment in Florida or the world. What are the career choices that most immediately come to mind for you for having a positive outcome for the environment? If I can get at least two of you to give a shout. I'll start with Ty. Meteorology? Awesome. Yeah. Where? Working for whom? NPA? All right. EPA, sorry. Okay. Couple more? And again, working for not a particular group, but just sort of category. Government, nonprofit, city, where. I'm not going to hold it to you and check in a few years. So you're. All right. Anybody else?
Film industry, except through doing like zero waste and stuff like that on the sets themselves, so that we have hundreds of people to actually just actively do these conservation things through weeks and weeks at a time on the sets.
Great. Anyone else? All right. I'll stick with those answers. And first I have to say, I think you may have, that did not turn out as well as it has in other audiences for me. One, because I think you're a little more sophisticated than I was hoping for, so kudos to you. But I think that still will demonstrate the point. So often when I ask that question, the general answer I get is, I'm going to work for government, right? I'm going to work for EPA. I'm going to work for a nonprofit. I want to go work for some of the amazing nonprofits we have here in Florida. I know I saw Aliki here. And so we've got just a phenomenal group of environmental nonprofits in Florida. We've got, I hope, a tremendous team working at the state. I mean, I can tell you, I've worked in the private sector for years, but there's no more rewarding career than I think personally than working on the environment in the public sector as a public servant. And so those are the two responses I always hear. I love the film industry. I mean, that I will sort of get to the point I wanted to make in a bit, but generally that's the response I get, right? I'm an environmentalist, and to me that means my future career is working for an environmental nonprofit or being a public servant working in Miami-Dade, working for the state, working nationally or working internationally. And I want to say one of the things that I think Southeast Florida has gotten so right, that Cleo has done such a good job at, is forming this diverse array of partnerships to raise awareness about environmental issues, specifically climate change. And you've found what I think is a tremendous strength from not falling into that paradigm, right? From realizing that there's a much broader audience and a much broader partnership that's needed to affect change. And so I'll use the film industry. Usually I don't get that answer, but I think that's actually one of the perfect answers, is that it's showing that the folks that impact the environment or the ability to change the future outcome for an environment doesn't necessarily mean you're working for a state agency or an environmental nonprofit. When I think of some of the leading influencers on climate change, right, I think of farmers. I've had some of the most robust discussions about climate change with large agricultural corporations who are some of the leading edge of identifying impacts of climate change and trying to figure out what it means to their livelihood, trying to figure out what it means to, 100-year investment plans, 50-year amortized investment plans that they're making, because they're tied to the land. So shifts in, and they have a massive amount of funds tied to land, so shifts in the climate mean dollars and cents to them right now. And they have to, inevitably, because of their large land holdings, think years and years out. And so I'd say, when you look back, I think, on major strides in climate change, and certainly probably 20 years down the road and you look back, I think probably a farmer or agricultural industry exec will be one of the leaders of changing how we work on climate change. Art, another film, right, and I know this wasn't exactly the point, they're industry, so if you're working for a large road building company, right, and this is the point that if you have an industry with a footprint impacted by the environment or working within the environment, so impacted by climate change or working within the environment, how you influence that industry to make smart decisions in the future and incorporate environmental impacts and incorporate ecosystem services into how they're viewing their future will have a dramatic impact on the future, both for that industry and for our environment. And I think that was sort of the point I took away from working with the film industry on how they interact with the environment, how they make decisions on their footprint. But you also, I think, when I think of some of the leading influencers, I think of artists, right? Absolutely not the normal answer you get on, I want to be part of an environmental movement and I want to be an environmentalist and I want to have a career in the environment. You don't usually hear someone say, photographer, right? I've still never gotten that response. Yet when I think of key influencers in the area, I think of a Mac Stone, a Clyde Butcher, and Paul Marciuloni is one of the, I'm sure I just butchered Paul's last name, but he's a great Everglades photographer in Southeast Florida. I think of them, right? I certainly, when you interact with the arts, it will immediately make you think about it differently, feel about it differently, and reinvigorate how you approach an issue. And you quickly realize they're a very important influencer, right? And you realize that because nonprofits especially are very adept at seeking that out. So you see a lot of partnerships with a Mac Stone and others to help tell the story that a nonprofit might be working on and trying to change or influence folks' perceptions on the environment or climate change, because they realize what a good medium that is and what a strong influencer that person is. The video that we just watched is a great example of that, right? You didn't have me up there talking about climate change. I would not elicit a single tear from a single person in this audience, right? Children absolutely do, and they're a great influence. I mean, you think about who are good communicators, you will absolutely start realizing, and I hope reframing for the students in this room, reframing what it means for your future to be a strong leader in the environment, to have your work career and what you're giving back to society on the environment, have a tremendous record there, but probably have a much broader array of opportunities for where you can work. And actually, probably at the end of the day, I'd challenge you, I think if you look more broadly about where you go in the future, you probably will end up having even greater outcome. I mean, looking at Coca-Cola today and some of the environmental team there that have influenced Coca-Cola on their recycling program and their zero waste initiative. I mean, that team will look back at their work legacy and their contribution to society, I think have a very clear feeling of what they achieved and what they gave back to society. So I'll start with that, just saying, I think that's something that has been done so well in the South Florida Climate Compact, so well by Cleo, so well. I mean, it's become sort of an intrinsic part. Every time I come down to the Tri-County area and talk about climate change, impacts like sea level rise or others, and meet with chief resiliency officers like Jim and others, it's always a pleasurable experience. And I always walk away sort of reinvigorated and thinking, it's such a rare occurrence to walk into a discussion about a natural resource challenge, right, which inevitably involves passionate feelings, an immense sense of urgency, some sense of being overwhelmed, and then end up have the meeting, feel productive, friendly, with a clear sense of purpose. But the thing that always strikes me is the sense of invigoration and urgency at the same time. And I've never had a meeting in Southeast Florida where I haven't walked away from it and thinking, wow, I feel more invigorated today than I did yesterday, right? And again, I think it's that culture of recognizing that you have to have a diverse group of voices, and you have to have partnership, and you have to build that partnership with a joint goal in the future. And hopefully that's something we're adopting as a state. So I'll sort of move from that, and I wanted to start out not necessarily talking about climate change, but just sort of talking about the new governor and the administration and some of the things we're focusing on at the moment. But I think the two will be linked, and if you bear with me, hopefully I can make that point. Because, again, like I said, urgency is one of those issues that colors every meeting on the environment. I mean, I don't think you're having a good meeting on the environment if somehow you walk away and think, yeah, I'll get to that in 20 years, right? Again, I think the video made that point. At the agency, we always have a sense, and I try and stress with our team and our leadership programs within the agency for our employees, and certainly on a day-to-day basis, the first thing I have to worry about as secretary is what am I doing for the employees of the agency, right? It's really not my actions that make the footprint of the agency. It's the 3,000 really passionate, talented natural resource workers we have at the agency that make the footprint and legacy for our agency. So the thing you have to think about that I have the privilege of thinking about every morning is, am I doing enough to empower those employees to make sure they're making progress on their legacy and their contribution to Florida, right? And so in that quickly instills a sense of urgency, because the thing that always slips into the mind is, will you look back 20 years from now and think, what if? And I think that was, again, the point of the video this morning. If you look back 50 years from now, are you going to have that feeling in your gut of, man, if only we had, right? And so I do think you're failing in a meeting if you don't have a sense of urgency within that sort of driving any discussion in natural resources. And that's why I'm so proud to be part of the DeSantis administration. Is I thought I had a sense of urgency until I started working with the governor, and now I'm just trying to keep up with him. It was a couple days into the administration, I thought we would be able to have, work through transition, maybe start working on a few issues with the governor a month in after, they figure out where the mansion is and the Capitol and so on. Did not expect the executive order, less than 2 days into the administration. And then since then, I've lost count at the number of times I've been with the governor on a natural resource issue, right? I mean, his sense of urgency, and certainly the First Lady's sense of urgency on environmental issues, is so precise, so intentional, and so focused on making sure we have good outcomes, and to make sure that we're always trying to be forward-leaning and have progress here in Florida. And I think that's key. And so if you haven't heard on the governor's executive order, I'll just sort of lay out some of the things that we're working on in the state and then move into climate change and natural resource issues. And so his executive order sort of took what I think we learned from Southeast Florida, was you have to have broad-based partnerships, you have to have good funding to get that done, and you have to have a sense of urgency. And you have to have science driving every bit of that. And so he started out with, commitment on water, and this was sort of the focus clearly from this past year, was $2.5 billion over 4 years to invest in water quality, a significant increase from prior years. And really, if the legislature agrees, and we're getting pretty close in the last week of session, we'll hopefully substantially be able to change outcomes in Florida. He also immediately went into science, right? So we have the privilege now of having the first chief science officer within the Department of Environmental Protection in the agency's history. We do have and continue to have some of the most amazing PhDs and scientists, I think, in Florida working on natural resources. But the thing that's really changed with this position is to make sure, and the way I talk about it, and the reason our team is so excited about it, was we really wanted to make sure, as we were having a leadership team meeting on any issue, is that all of us inevitably deal with what I talk about, thinking about people, thinking about management decisions, thinking about budget, thinking about all the things that can occupy time. And even our deputy secretary, who's over resilience issues and other things, also had to worry about, was he serving 1,500 people well that day, and worry about the management issues that come along with that. And so we really were interested in having a position that didn't have to think about anything other than the scientific opinion on that issue. Didn't have to worry about whether it was convenient, right? Didn't have to worry about what the budget decision was on it. Didn't have to worry about a personnel issue for it, right? But simply have the freedom to, in management conversations, say, I know this may not be convenient for the discussion. I don't know what budget impact this has. I don't know whether you're going to have to do something with an employee for this. But here's my unadulterated scientific opinion or question, right? Hey, you should be thinking about X. And so we're really excited, and I think that will be a game changer for how we function as an agency. And hopefully it becomes sort of a model for many other states throughout the U.S. And so Dr. Tom Frazier was the director for the School of Natural Resources and Environment at the University of Florida. And we are so pleased we were able to bring him into our team. And so he'll be starting in just a few weeks with the agency after he finishes up the spring semester at the University of Florida. The other sort of real focus on science was having a chief resiliency officer. And so that was the next thing that the governor laid out in his executive order. The chief resiliency officer is not going to be within DEP for, I think, a very, very good reason. It's actually going to be housed within the governor's office. And that is when we talk about resilience, which is a lot of what we work on our shoreline program and our resilience office in the department, resilience should not be a program. We have it as a program within DEP to help focus and forward lean what we're doing. But at the end of the day, if we're talking about coastal resilience and impacts from climate change, that's got to be baked in every single thing we do as an agency, right? That's when we will be successful on our footprint on dealing with impacts from climate change like sea level rise or other issues. And so, you shouldn't have a individual resilience program. You should have, within the Department of Transportation, every built infrastructure should incorporate thinking about resilience and projections on sea level rise or other climate change issues, right? Same thing for the Department of Health, Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And so I hope, by having that chief resiliency officer position and the governor, it really helps start and create that dynamic change of being able to talk about broad-based policies for the state on questions like this, and then just have that become part of whatever agency does. So you might have a resilience office within the Department of Transportation, within DEP, within the Department of Health, but really the footprint is in making sure that every action we're taking starts incorporating that broader thought level. And certainly the chief resiliency officers here in South Florida do a great job working with their local governments and county governments in achieving the same thing, right? And so we're thrilled about seeing that. I believe if the job posting is not already up, it will be up on Monday. You can always go to DEP's website, and from our front page, one of the scrolls will direct you to our resilience program and have an advertisement for it, since we're trying to help promote and make sure we get enough excited, good applicants coming in for the governor. And I encourage you to spread the word about that and have qualified folks apply. So with those two changes, we're really excited because it has a new sense of excitement and I think a really good focus on both science, making sure that it is positioned well, right, so that it's not having to cope with is that convenient or not for, again, budget or personnel decisions, but also science in a way that it spreads across everything else and empowers all the other actions of government. And I would use that chief resiliency officer as an example of that. Again, positioning science in a way that it furthers progress by every other aspect of government, right? And is not simply siloed away or nested under an individual program. So in addition to that, the governor also laid out some other sort of key prongs for at least my agency, and one was enforcement, right? And so we talk about sort of three pillars within the agency, one being science, wanting to make sure that we're positioned to have science with a clear, intentional voice within the agency. Two, making sure we're getting the full leverage out of the laws we have as a state, right? to make sure that we left nothing on the table by not fully implementing the laws we have. And part of that means enforcement of the laws we have. And so we're excited that we've got a bill going to the governor shortly that will bring back sworn law enforcement officers to the Department of Environmental Protection to make sure that alongside our permitting staff who do inspections, that we also have sworn law enforcement officers that can go out and help us with enforcement issues throughout the state. It's something that we had as an agency years ago now, but we've not had for almost a decade. And we're really, really excited to get back. And I think that will help reinforce that second pillar within the agency. And then the third pillar we talk about all the time is using those two first pillars, don't mean anything without partnership. Again, and that means having funds to incentivize partnerships. It means having a culture that looks to build partnerships and help either leverage off the excitement of others and what others want to do for protection of the environment in Florida, right? Or help create that. And so all that to say sort of frames where we are as an agency. And so for resilience, one of the changes the governor made was let's have, in the interim, DEP continue to drive a narrative on coastal resilience, one aspect of climate change, right? One response to climate change or sea level rise resulting from climate change. And certainly it made sense for us as an agency with our beaches program to have that. And so we're excited to do that. And I'll mention sort of our goal for the year, and if I try never to do a presentation or a talk without giving homework and without sort of leveraging off the knowledge of folks in the audience, is our goal for the year is to build off what the Southeast has done so well and what we see forming in Tampa and elsewhere in Florida, right? Which is just a non-political, very functional, science-based conversation on climate change and specifically sea level rise and what we have to do as a state about that. And I think y'all have done that well, right? And it's easier to do when you've taken the steps of having a vulnerability assessment, having a climate action plan, right? Those things immediately create a foundation for conversation that is easy for anyone to approach, right? Not much ever gets done in this world. It's very easy to do the I blame you, or here's why you're wrong, or here's why I'm right. And that can sometimes feel rewarding in the moment. But I would tell you I've not seen much work product or outcome after those statements. Where I've seen outcome and work product in major changes in how we work on resource issues is by laying the foundation that allows everyone to have a conversation informed by the same science that's approachable, and then you always notice about a year or so later, you're actually further than where you hoped you would be. And so as a state, what we're hoping to do this year is end the year with a feeling that we've been able to, as an agency, take those conversations, take the work that's been done here for years and years and years, and make sure every county in Florida has done the same thing, right? That if you go to a Dixie County up in Big Bend, Florida, that you can walk in and talk to a government official about a risk assessment. What are you doing about sea level rise? Have you thought about intensified storms, right? And our hope is that we can end this year strong and sort of pass a baton over to the state's first chief resiliency officer with that good footing for the state of being able to walk into any county in Florida and talk about these issues and have the same ease of conversation and the same welcoming sensation that you get down here when you work on these issues. Again, whether it's Jacksonville, Dixie County, Santa Rosa County, and the Panhandle, that you have that same platform, because I think that really will be the game changer for moving forward on discussions about resiliency in Florida. And so that's our goal. And so what we've done as an agency to position ourselves for that, and I've had the pleasure of serving the agency for just about 2 years now, was, again, start with human capital. Nothing in our agency gets done without a talented employee. And so we made the decision, make it a priority, put our time and money into it. And that means we also have to have great human capital. And so hopefully many of y'all have had the pleasure of working with Whitney Gray, who brought on just about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half, who's working and running our resiliency program, our coastal program. And Whitney's our human capital to do just that, to take the conversations that really seeded here in Southeast Florida and leverage that success to be a statewide success. And so what we started doing was, again, with the concept of there shouldn't be an individual resilience program, there should be resilience in everything we do, but recognizing we were not there yet, we started our program, and Whitney's really driven hard with more than a couple $1 million a year in grants, mainly focused on two things. One is planning dollars to work with local governments to get them up to the same level as so many of the local governments here in Southeast Florida, or to help create unique examples of new planning efforts in Southeast Florida that then can educate others throughout the state, because some other counties aren't there yet to start taking those steps, or to work on individual infrastructure projects and incent projects that can really be a learning lesson and example for other areas in the state. Again, with the sort of about $6.5 million we're working with, we're not building massive projects, and the intent of our program is not to be the funding source for massive projects. The intent of our program is to make sure that we've got planning throughout Florida, and that we're incenting projects that really stand as an example for the community, that other communities can come look at, and that further the conversation that y'all are having today, right? That become the center for a conversation as you're walking by them and you see a living shoreline program, right? The benefit is not just the footprint of that project, but hopefully the benefit is the community conversation it has. And hopefully also you have other communities come visit, see the project, and it starts replicating, right? It's that sort of incubator impact that we're looking to have as an agency. And so that's our goal for this year, is to end the year strong and have a feeling that we've really been able to turn the table and get that statewide readiness. And so while that's our goal, I'd encourage you, if you can help further us in reaching that goal, or if you say, hey, no, I think that's a bunch of garbage, I think you're totally off base on your goal, and I've got a different goal for you, challenge us to reach that, right? And so we always appreciate that. So the last thing I'll mention, as I think I'm probably going a little over time, is I can't thank y'all enough for the work you're doing here. Certainly, everything we do is based on partnerships. I think the model y'all have here really is changing the way not only Florida looks at issues, but is changing the narrative on sea level rise, natural resource issues, climate change as a whole for the nation, right? As I mentioned at the very beginning, it's rare that you go into a very intense natural resource issue where you're having either a crisis or what seems like an overwhelming issue, and have an easy meeting. None of those are easy conversations. Again, because you're always thinking about the 50 years from now, am I going to look back and feel like I didn't do enough for my daughter, right? I mean, that certainly is in the mind of every employee I have. And so it's so important to be able to take science, but then get it in a way that it becomes an incubator. And in order to take science and create an incubator effect and see great progress on policy, you've got to do what you're doing here, right? Which is have partnerships that are approachable, partnerships that don't begin with blame, but just begin with, hey, let's bring the right folks in the room and let's get the shared science on the table and create an equal footing, and then let's see what grows from that. And certainly, I hope y'all feel like a lot has grown from that here in Southeast Florida. You should be so proud of yourselves for what you've done. Again, I'm very thankful because we look at what we're doing now at the department and we recognize so much of what we're doing is simply shamelessly stealing what y'all did probably 10 years ago. So I will end with that and just say thank you to everyone here.
Thank you, Noah. We will be challenging you.
Yeah.
I know people have questions, and we are a little bit over time, but I really want to take the opportunities that you can ask a few questions to the secretary. So we'll start here. And I'm going to try to see if I can get another mic.
Yeah, hi. Dr. Van Leer from the University of Miami. Every scientist on Earth tells us that we have to reduce our carbon emissions. And we somehow talk about resiliency, but we forget about the driving thing that's actually making this happen. And there is a bill before Congress called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Bill, HR 763. It's been endorsed by the Palm Beach County Commission. And I'm wondering what your agency can do to try to push this price on carbon forward so we can begin to reduce the hazard that we are still accelerating.
Sure, great question. And I'm surprised you beat a leaky to it. So I would say, first I need to look at the bill. I'm not familiar with the bill, so I will take a look and do my homework on that. I would second say, I do think one of the things that as a state we'll have to look at is how are we having energy discussions, right? As a whole, the state is, we have a unique separation of duties on the energy footprint in Florida, right? It is not, I always rue the day when I get asked questions on a sort of long-term energy policy or can we invest in wave energy. Had a meeting the other day with a great researcher on ocean current energy. And no one believes me when I say, well, the grant program for that right now is in the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, right? That's not your immediate. And we have a very strange division within the state on energy policy. You've got the energy office for the state, sort of leading voice on energy policy issues within the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. You've got utility regulation in a complete separate entity, the Public Service Commission. We certainly have air quality and drive decisions on that to try to force and make progress on the quality of our air in Florida. But it is a very strange division that I think makes the questions.
We're not addressing the underlying.
Right, yeah, but, and so don't disagree with you at all. I would just say one of the things I would think about as a group, right, is I think in order to have those correct conversations, there'll have to be a discussion about how do you link all those things together in a functional way in Florida. I'll say this. I think we're probably better positioned than we've been for years because we have a tremendous commissioner at the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services who's not your traditional agricultural commissioner, right? Nikki Fried comes to that department with, I think, a different perspective and different focus areas. And so if ever there was a commissioner to sort of really capitalize on having an energy office in the Department of Agriculture, it's Nikki Fried, right? And I think she also comes with the approach of, as the governor does, and what you've seen from this cabinet is just a willingness to work together to achieve progress forward. And so I think that'll happen. But I would just use your question to sort of plant the seed in folks' minds of, at some point down the road, I think there'll have to be on energy issues some restructuring of how all those things work together.
As vulnerable as we are, we should be the first state to price carbon. Okay?
Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Bernley. So we have this question and the one in the back.
Hi, good morning. Richard Silvestri from Fort Pierce, and I have to tell Professor Van Leer here, I'm a graduate at the University of Miami. Yep. Many years ago, I'm 75 years old. Okay, I'm going to tell you.
I won't hold it against you.
Okay, I'm going to tell you, I have 2 black eyes from your agency. All right, I've been involved in environmental issues for a long time now, and your agency, to me, has given me 2 black eyes. I can't tell you the hours and the money I've spent traveling around the country, around the state, defending the environment, talking about climate change, global warming, those things. Mm-hmm. I'm very skeptical. When they said, you're speaking here just now, I went, oh no. Because your department, we have another name for it. It's called Don't Expect Protection. That's what DEP stands for, okay?
Yep.
There's other names, probably not even that flattering. Mm-hmm. Now, I have to tell you, pardon me? I'm coming to my question. Okay,
That's
you
fine.
brought up, I can stand here for hours and ask you questions. My one question right now, you talked about enforcement.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be impressed because I also come from a construction background, and as a small contractor, if I got red tagged on a job and I kept working, I went to jail. DEP red tagged the fracking well in Collier County, okay, and they kept fracking. If it had been me, I'd have put an FDLE agent on a plane with a set of handcuffs and gone to the headquarters in Houston and arrested the CEO. When you have those kind of guts, I'll be impressed.
Well, thank you.
Are you ready to do that?
Thank you.
That's my question.
So And it's a good question. It's a question I appreciate. And frankly, this is, I mean, on natural resources issues in Florida, if you don't have passion about the natural resources in Florida, and I'm not sure why we're meeting, right? I mean, that is why we live in Florida. That's why we want to raise a family in Florida. That's why we want to have a business in Florida. So I appreciate the passion. And I'll just say this. I became secretary 2 years ago after the incident you're talking about. And our level of enforcement was something I thought was off. And our approach to enforcement was something I thought was off. And that could be tweaked to get better outcomes, right? I think the idea that the agency had at the time was compliance assistance and to make sure we're front-loading with education to make sure we reduce the number of violations. That is absolutely right to do, right? And it was a great idea for the agency. And so I applaud the work of prior secretaries on ramping up education with the idea that if you can prevent a violation, that's the absolute best outcome for the environment, right? And so kudos to the secretaries who've done great work before me, and I really appreciate, prior administration's focus on that. What we noticed, as you always learn from hindsight, when I came into the agency, what I said was, well, so we've done a really good job on educating, but the focus on education, I think, resulted, and with actions that happened like sworn law enforcement leaving the agency, going over to FWCC, created an aspect of, I think there were some areas where there needed to be that strong enforcement. I'm not sure if I'm going to send the SWAT team out of a helicopter, but definitely criminal enforcement and definitely criminal prosecution. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, so that is where we are headed as an agency. I think since I've been secretary, the enforcement numbers have gone up each and every year, and we are very excited about having criminal enforcement back in the agency. So
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. This is our last question.
Hi, my name is Guido Reichstatter. I'm an organizer with Extinction Rebellion Miami. The IPCC has recently said we have about 15 years before our carbon emissions lock in a global rise in temperature of 2°C over the pre-industrial. Some of the expected consequences of this would be the devastation of all coral reefs in the tropics. That includes Florida. So my question is, you say that you speak often with the governor. I would request that you could ask him to please declare a state of climate emergency and begin telling the truth about the magnitude of the climate crisis. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll take that as a statement. Certainly I will talk about with the governor, certainly for coral reefs and the impact we're having right now on our coral reef system from acidification, from rising temperatures of water, from disease, and the disease experience we're having right now is something we take very, very seriously as an agency, and we have one of our top priorities. And we're seeing right now growing conversation, hopefully recognition of what we're facing, both from the county level, state, and nationally. But I appreciate the comment.